Welcome to the deep dive. We're your shortcut, really, to getting well informed. And today, we have a pretty critical mission. We want to cut through all the noise, you know, and really focus on the architects of modern power. How do these moguls, historical figures, and today's titans actually systematically gain and then, well, maintain control, not just over their own fortunes, but over entire systems, economic, political, even our digital
That's
lives?
exactly right. We have to look beyond just, the sheer amount of money.
Yeah.
Today's sources push us to define power differently. It's the ability to shape outcomes, to move markets, to write the algorithms that decide what you see online, or even rewrite the actual rules of political games.
Yeah.
We're drawing on insights from, well, all over secretive think tanks, Wall Street insiders, tech giants, even pharmaceutical dynasties.
Okay, so let's lay out how we're going to tackle this. We've sort of grouped the source material into three main areas of power. First, the foundations, mastering physical stuff, assets, and engineering these huge market collisions. Think 19th century.
The tangible stuff.
Second, the big shift, controlling the new systems of the digital age data, algorithms, networks. That's very much our world now.
Absolutely.
And finally, maybe the ultimate play, using wealth directly as a political and regulatory weapon, basically shaping the state itself.
Right. So you have to start with those foundations, where power was, well, tangible, something
Yeah.
you could point to. And when you look at figures like Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, the key thing isn't just that he owned ships and railroads, it's how he viewed them. The sources say he saw his businesses almost like warfare.
Yeah, that quote is striking. Military campaigns against his enemies, not managing machinery, but fighting nattles. And it also says once he'd won, achieved victory, he kind of detested details. He lost interest.
Exactly. The thrill was in the conflict, the strategy, the conquest,
Yeah.
not the day-to-day running of things.
And that reputation for, frankly, ruthlessness, he used it, right, as a weapon.
Yeah.
Financial pressure.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the Cortlandt Palmer incident. Vanderbilt demanded this exorbitant price, $70,000 for a steamer that had only cost $75,000 to build 3 years before. On paper, it makes no sense.
But it wasn't about the boat's value, was it? It was about breaking a competitor.
Precisely. He knew Palmer was weak financially. He knew he'd collapse under pressure.
So Palmer paid up because the alternative was risking a head-on collision with Vanderbilt. That was the real calculation.
That's it. Avoiding his wrath, his power, was worth the price. His reputation was his leverage.
And protecting that reputation, that perception of inevitable victory, was crucial, especially in the stock market.
Which is why threats like Daniel Drew's bear campaign were so dangerous. Drew was talking about a lockup strategy.
Okay, maybe break that down for us. What did a lockup mean back then?
Sure. Essentially, it meant cornering the market on a specific stock. You'd buy up all available shares, often using short-selling tactics yourself. And anyone who had borrowed shares to sell short would be trapped. They'd have to buy back shares from you at whatever price you demanded to cover their position.
Nasty. So if Drew did that to Vanderbilt's stock...
It could crash the price, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Vanderbilt himself, he probably had the cash reserves to handle it personally, maybe buy up central stock. But his image, this idea that his success lifted all boats, benefited all stockholders, it would be shattered, especially for the average person buying on margin, which was most people back then. A market collapse linked to him would destroy his standing. His power depended on that perception of shared success.
Okay, moving forward in time a bit, we see media moguls kind of adopting similar aggressive tactics. Controlling the story becomes the power. William Randolph Hearst, for instance. He positioned himself as somehow bigger than the Democratic Party.
He framed everything as this epic conflict between the trusts and the people. Very populist language.
Which is pretty ironic, considering he ultimately took the nomination from Tammany Hall, the ultimate political machine.
It really speaks to his understanding of media, doesn't it? He knew he needed the machine's backing, but he also needed his newspapers to paint him as its opponent. Masterful, if cynical, positioning.
And his power wasn't just in headlines. He could directly steer political outcomes.
Oh, definitely. The sources point to his role in the 1932 Democratic Convention. It was deadlocked. Hearst apparently got on the phone with Speaker Garner, told him to throw California and Texas behind Roosevelt.
And that did.
That swung it, secured the nomination. That's direct systemic influence brokered through media power and backroom deals. That's real architecture of power.
Now, this kind of foundational power assets, reputation, media control played out globally, but with twists, right?
Yeah.
Especially in Asia under colonial rule.
Yes, the context there was different. The rise of Asian business elites, particularly for places like Hong Kong, faced this effective race bar. Dealing with the big British colonial banks, like the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, well, it wasn't easy.
One source described getting an audience with them as, like, seeking an audience with God. That paints a picture.
It really does. This exclusion forced a different model. Less about inheriting access, more about agility and connections. These tycoons had to build wealth differently.
So they became masters of navigating the system differently, what the sources call rapid cycling.
Exactly. Exploiting bureaucratic loopholes, finessing deals, and, crucially, buttering up politicians.
Ah, the political connection. So the state and business became very tightly interwoven.
Inextricably linked, which allowed for incredibly fast, often leveraged growth.
And that led to some weird economic numbers, didn't it? Like Malaysia reporting exports higher than its GDP.
Yeah, that seems impossible at first glance, right? How can you export more than your entire economy produces?
So how does that work?
It works because those export figures often include the value of imported components that are then assembled and shipped out. It reflects huge foreign trade booms, with local tycoons often acting as the crucial facilitators, the connectors.
But thinking about the long-term impact, that system, especially in a place like Hong Kong, seemed very durable.
Extremely. Whether it was under the British or during the Japanese occupation or later under Chinese rule. The city was often managed through the same established elite group.
How is that maintained structurally?
A key mechanism was the creation of these functional constituencies in the Legislative Council.
Okay, what does that mean exactly? Functional constituencies.
It means specific seats in the legislature were reserved for particular business or professional sectors: finance, real estate, banking, and so on. It essentially guaranteed that the established Godfather interests, as the source calls them, always had a seat at the table, regardless of popular votes.
So it was an intentional design to keep the elite influential.
Precisely, an architectural choice to maintain that power structure across different regimes.
And sometimes that power was used in ways that, well, didn't benefit the public, who often admired these figures.
No, definitely not always. The example of Li Ka-shing's son, Richard, and the Pacific Century Cyberworks takeover of Hong Kong Telecom comes up. The share price absolutely cratered after the hype. A 97% peak-to-trough drop. Devastating for small investors.
And how did insiders view that?
One former Morgan Stanley MD called it totally cynical exploitation of a public that adores him but doesn't know better. It suggests the structure served the insiders, first and foremost.
Okay, so that's the old world in a way. Physical assets, market muscle, direct political dealing. But the 21st century brings a huge shift.
A profound shift, yes. Power moves from controlling things like steamships or land to controlling the intangible, data, networks, and maybe most importantly, what we call the social graph.
The social graph, meaning?
Essentially, the web of connections between people online. Who knows whom, who follows whom, who shares what. Controlling that flow is the new power.
And Facebook, or Meta now, really embodies that transition. They didn't just sell ads like old media.
No, they created something else entirely. A revolutionary advertising business, the sources call it. It wasn't the shotgun approach of Hearst's newspapers.
It was a scalpel.
Exactly. Precision targeting on a scale never seen before. You weren't just aiming for men 1835.
You could target. What was the example? Cat lovers in Toronto with college degrees versus blue-collar dog lovers in Vancouver.
Precisely that kind of granularity. Targeting based on interests, location, education, behavior, connections, all scraped from user data. That ability to pinpoint and potentially influence specific groups, specific behaviors, that systemic power derived from controlling the data flow.
And initially, Mark Zuckerberg framed this in quite idealistic terms, didn't he?
He did. The idea was that a more open and transparent world, driven by more sharing, would somehow lead to a healthier society. People held accountable by their digital footprint, essentially.
A nice idea, but the reality?
The reality was that the sheer scale just overwhelmed everything. Think about Instagram as it grew. The ratio is something like 1 employee for every 1.5 million users.
Wow. 1 person for 1.5 million users.
Yeah. How could that tiny team, mostly in Silicon Valley, possibly understand or manage the user experience on the ground? They became totally disconnected. They couldn't effectively deal with the systemic issues, the platform itself, amplified bullying, comparison culture, mental health impacts.
Because the system was just too big, too fast, and too profitable to really change course.
That seems to be the case. The growth imperative overshadowed the initial philosophy.
Okay, this brings us to another aspect of the new systems, how they can be built on hype and secrecy, sometimes masking really fundamental problems. Theranos is the classic tragic example here.
Absolutely textbook.
Yeah.
You have the charismatic founder, Elizabeth Holmes, selling this incredible vision. You have massive investment pouring in. But behind the scenes, it wasn't working. Employees were raising red flags early on, unauthorized people in the regulated lab space. That's a huge compliance issue.
And they were actively hiding things.
Yes. Specific instructions to conceal activities from the manufacturers of the actual conventional blood testing machines they were secretly using.
Mm.
Siemens representatives were kept in the dark.
And the fixes they tried internally, preluting blood samples.
Yes, Sunny Balwani, the president, ordered that. They had these tiny fingerstick samples, not enough blood for multiple tests on their own malfunctioning devices. So they diluted them to run more tests. But if your machine already has a high error rate, adding a manual dilution step, well, the source says it was likely to make things worse.
Just chasing the appearance of function, not actual results.
Exactly. Quantity over quality to keep the illusion going.
And how did they keep it going for so long? Political connections seem key.
Critical. Holmes cultivated this high-profile image, White House visits, state dinners, posing with influential figures. That political cover made it incredibly difficult for regulators like the FDA to really crack down.
Yeah.
How do you aggressively investigate a company whose founder is literally advocating for more FDA oversight in public forums?
While secretly dodging it.
Right. The political shield bought them crucial time.
We see echoes of this kind of high-minded facade, maybe, and secrecy in the crypto world, too, with Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF, and FTX.
Yes, SBF very skillfully used the philosophy of effective altruism.
Explain that a bit. Effective altruism.
It's the idea that you should use reason and evidence to do the most good possible with your resources, often by earning a lot of money to give it away effectively. SBF framed his trading firm, Alameda Research, not just as a way to make money, but as a vessel to save some vast number of lives.
So a moral justification for aggressive, high-risk trading.
That's how it appeared. He explicitly contrasted Alameda with his previous employer, Jane Street, which he sort of dismissed as just a place to increase the number in their bank account. This altruistic framing built enormous trust and attracted billions in investment and deposits. It acted as a kind of social shield.
But underneath that philanthropic image, intense secrecy.
Very much so, especially early on. The sources mention when his colleague Caroline Ellison was considering joining, SBF was incredibly cagey over coffee. Wouldn't even say what he was working on.
Why so secretive if the goal was so noble?
Well, in hindsight, that secrecy allowed them to operate with extreme leverage, create and sell their own highly questionable tokens like FTT, and, crucially, obscure the fact that Alameda was borrowing billions in customer funds from FTX. The altruistic mission hit a very fragile, very risky financial structure.
Okay, so we've seen controlling assets, controlling information, but the next level seems to be using wealth to actually change the rules, engineering the political and regulatory environment itself.
And the Clock Network is arguably the masterclass in this.
Yeah.
Their strategy wasn't short-term. It was incredibly systematic, playing the long game.
Not just campaign donations, but building an entire infrastructure.
Exactly. Decades spent subsidizing this vast network of think tanks, academic programs, advocacy groups, many with names that sound neutral or even progressive, all designed to wage a long-term battle of ideas, to shift the entire intellectual and political landscape towards their worldview.
And that worldview, while presented as promoting limited government, just happened to align perfectly with their business interests.
It dovetailed seamlessly, as one source puts it. They advocated for...
Let's connect this back to Wall Street. We saw hints of this earlier, but the 80s junk bond era with Drexel Burnham Lambert seems like a prime example of finance buying political cover.
Oh, absolutely. What's really fascinating in there is how nakedly transactional it seems to have been. Drexel, under Michael Milken, basically funded political protection. The example given is contributing around $24,000 to Senator Worth's campaign.
And Worth had previously been critical of junk bonds.
Yes. But after the contributions, he became a key defender of junk bonds. He even dropped an effort to clamp down on green mail.
Remind us what green mail is.
It's essentially corporate blackmail. A raider buys up a chunk of a company's stock, threatens a hostile takeover, and then forces the company to buy back those shares at a premium. Good for the raider, bad for the company and its other shareholders. Drexel facilitated a lot of this.
So by donating to politicians like Worth, Drexel bought the political space needed to keep their high-leverage, often predatory financial machine running.
That's exactly how it looks. They neutralized potential regulatory threats through political contributions.
And that machine was huge, systemically important even.
So important that when the Ivan Bokeski insider trading scandal broke, threatening to expose the whole network, the Dow Jones dropped 43 points instantly. That was a massive plunge back then. It showed genuine fear across the market about the potential collapse of what they called the milk and money machine.
The pressure in finance, especially in hedge funds later on, to find any edge seems immense. This brings us to SI Capital and the idea of black edge.
Right, black edge being the term for illegal insider information. Given how hard it is to consistently beat the market legally, the temptation, and apparently the practice at SEC under Steve Cohen, was to cross that line.
But even the legal efforts to get an edge show the intensity, don't they?
Absolutely. Paints a picture of an arms race for information. Hiring armies of PhDs, mathematicians, physicists to build trading algorithms. That's one side. But then you have the almost bizarrely analog stuff. Paying soccer moms to walk the aisles at Walmart, counting inventory. Seriously. Or analyzing satellite photos of retail parking lots to estimate foot traffic before earnings announcements.
Wow. It shows just how hard it is to find a legal advantage, pushing firms to these extreme, almost paranoid levels of information gathering. Finally, in this section on weaponizing wealth, we have to talk about the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma, using the legal and regulatory system itself as a shield.
It's a devastating example. The core issue with OxyContin was this calculated risk based on, well, nothing. Purdue had zero scientific evidence that OxyContin was less addictive than other opioids, yet the FDA allowed them to make that claim on a label.
And that claim was the key to its blockbuster success and the subsequent crisis.
It was the linchpin, and Purdue pushed it relentlessly.
Through a deliberate company policy of misinformation.
Yes. Sales reps ran a coordinated and heavily scripted campaign. They hammered doctors with the message. Addiction risk is less than 1%, over and over. Investigators later looked at the sales reps' own notes. They found evidence of these misleading claims being pushed in nearly every single state.
The source mentions coloring a map of the U.S. red.
Yes, state by state, showing the pervasiveness of the fraudulent marketing. It was a truly national campaign of deception.
And even as the death toll mounted, the family's focus was on the narrative.
Chillingly, yes. Privately, family members insisted prescription opioids are not the cause of the crisis. Their internal emails show them focused on correcting the narrative. One even suggested they should stop using the term opioid crisis altogether in their communications, complete denial, and focus on image management.
And then the bankruptcy process itself became a tool.
It seems so. Purdue's lawyers pushed plaintiffs hard to accept a settlement. They leveraged the clubby nature of the specialized bankruptcy court system. The sources point out things like Purdue's own board chairman, knowing the judge personally. The mediator chosen had previously been paid millions by Purdue.
That sounds cozy.
It creates an environment where plaintiffs feel immense pressure. The implied message was, take this deal now, or face years fighting us in a system potentially stacked against you, maybe for even less money in the end. It used the legal structure itself to cap their liability.
Okay, so the final piece we identified is this power of persona. How moguls craft their image, control their narrative, and shape the internal culture of their organizations.
Yes, and Adam Newman at WeWork is such a vivid example. He wasn't just selling office space. He was selling community, a higher purpose.
Even though, functionally, it looked exactly like Regus, the established, much less glamorous competitor.
Right. The reality was secondary to the performance, and that performance extended to the internal culture. Eccentricity was part of the brand. His private bathroom apparently had an altar, incense fruit, next to his personal sauna. It blurred lines between CEO, spiritual leader, and lifestyle guru.
And that whole performance, that narrative, attracted billions in investment based on vibe more than fundamentals.
Precisely. It was masterful image crafting until it wasn't sustainable.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Contrasting Newman's almost cult-like luxury with Jeff Bezos at Amazon, Bezos performed frugality.
Deliberately so, yes. Even as a massive multimillionaire, then billionaire, he'd make show small things, getting his coffee loyalty card punched. Or if he flew private, making a point to say, the company isn't paying for this, I am.
Why? What was the point of that performance for his own employees?
It was about reinforcing Amazon's notoriously Spartan, cutthroat corporate culture. Frugality was a core leadership principle. But that public performance masked a reality that sources describe as a deeply unhappy place to work. Intense pressure, limited raises, constant conflict were the norm.
And that ruthlessness wasn't just internal, right? The Gazelle project.
Right. That was Bezos's internal term for dealing with small publishers who resisted Amazon's terms. He told his team to approach them the way a cheetah would pursue a sickly gazelle.
Wow, that's explicit.
It's a stark metaphor for using market dominance to crush weaker players. A very different kind of performance than Neumann's.
Let's look at another tech giant founder, Bill Gates at early Microsoft. Different style again. Maybe less about performance, more about intellectual edge and internal structure.
Gates was known more for his intellect, sometimes described alongside a bad personality perhaps, but he definitely built a competitive advantage into Microsoft's structure.
How so?
A key edge came from the applications group, the people making Word, Excel getting inside information from the operating systems group developing Windows. They got early access, previews of where the OS was going. That gave them a huge advantage over competitors developing software for Windows. They knew what was coming.
So using internal structure for competitive gain. And he was also good at strategic deals, wasn't he? The Apple deal.
Oh, the Excel deal with Apple was classic Gates strategy. He agreed to make Microsoft Excel exclusive to the Mac for 2 years. A huge win for Apple, needing software. But in return, Microsoft licensed Apple's basic programming language. More importantly, got Microsoft's foot firmly inside the Apple ecosystem.
A strategic Trojan horse.
Exactly. It apparently infuriated Apple's own spreadsheet team, whose project got canceled. Gates secured a key market while embedding Microsoft deeper with its rival.
Okay, finally, let's talk about Oprah Winfrey. A different kind of mogul, building power through media persona and celebrity influence. The golden sphere.
That's a good term for it. Oprah achieved this almost untouchable status. The sources note she recognized early on that achieving big money required intense focus. She apparently felt she had to delete husbands and children and carpools from life's agenda to reach that level. Total dedication to building her brand and influence.
But maintaining that sphere required control, didn't it? Strict control.
Absolutely. Everyone working at the Oprah magazine, for example, had to sign these incredibly strict confidentiality agreements.
Which critics saw not as fostering trust, as she claimed, but rooted in mistrust.
That was the criticism, yes. That it was about tightly controlling information flow and protecting the carefully constructed image.
And her show's formula, while seemingly authentic, was also carefully calculated, wasn't it?
It was brilliant television, focusing on controversial shows with guests that have some kind of passion and emotion and a story to tell, and she often connected it back to her own struggles, creating resonance. But that authenticity had boundaries, defined by her power and relationships. She would grill guests relentlessly on personal matters, asking Liberace about his wealth, Robin Givens about abuse.
But not her powerful friends.
That's the key point. Friends like Tom Cruise or John Travolta were never seriously questioned about Scientology, despite it being a major public controversy surrounding them.
So her power allowed her to choose where the light shone and where it didn't, protecting her sphere.
Exactly. It demonstrates how even a persona built on perceived authenticity involves calculated control and the strategic deployment of influence. So when you pull back and look at all these figures, these different eras and industries, what's the common thread? I think it really boils down to controlling systems. Whether it's Vanderbilt controlling transport networks, the Cucks engineering ideological systems, or Zuckerberg controlling information systems, and often success relies on specific tactics. High leverage, like Drexel or FTX used. Ideological cover, like the Cucks or the Sacklers deployed, or deep systemic secrecy, like Theranos.
And the scale is just immense. Their ability to operate at that level and directly influence policy, it really forces you to think about inequality structurally, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The sources bring up that economic relationship R versus G.
Right, Thomas Piketty's framework. The idea that economic inequality tends to increase when R, the rate of return on capital, is consistently greater than G, the overall rate of economic growth.
If wealth grows faster than the economy itself.
Then wealth inevitably concentrates in fewer hands. The gap widens.
And what we've discussed today are basically case studies and moguls actively working to increase that RG gap, right? Whether it's fighting for lower capital gains taxes, achieving regulatory capture to reduce business costs, or using leverage to generate outsized returns.
They're effectively boosting R, the return on their capital, while often resisting policies that might boost G, like higher wages or broader social investment.
It creates this powerful divergent force, concentrating wealth and power in ways that become incredibly hard to counteract.
Which really leads us to the final, maybe unsettling thought for you, our listeners. If the new forms of power are less about tangible things, factories, railroads, and more about controlling the intangible, The algorithms, the data, the narratives that filter our reality.
Things that are inherently opaque, hidden inside code or internal company decisions.
Exactly. How do we as the public actually audit that power? When the sources of it, the code itself, the internal strategies, the closed-door political deals, are deliberately obscured or legally protected, sometimes even through bankruptcy.
What tools do we even have left to understand, let alone challenge, this kind of hyper-concentrated systemic power that shapes so much of our world?
That's the question we leave you with.